shortly as well, but we want to respect everybody's time, and we know it's an extremely busy time right now out there in the schools, report cards, people collecting items, and you're still teaching online. So wow, thanks for being here and taking the time. So do you want me to just go ahead and get started? Matt, Jen, we're ready?
I'm ready to go when you are.
Okay, great. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Before we join together in prayer and our land acknowledgement, I just want to say that, wow, I just checked our registration for this session, and we have over 90, actually close to 100 participants joining us today. So we have kindergarten educators, we have grade 1 to 3 classroom teachers, we have resource teachers, we have people who do coverage in kindergarten, we have principals, and we have members of our central OCSB support teams as well. So that's really, really impressive. So welcome, and we will just take some time to take a deep breath in our busy day and acknowledge the land that we are located on. So as we are privileged to do, we will start with acknowledging that as we gather today, we take the time to reflect, and we take the time to recognize that we are blessed and humbled to live on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded Indigenous territories of the Algonquin people, on whose territory we pray, learn, play, and work. And I ask you to join me in prayer, and I will say the prayer, and if you could follow along, and we'll bless ourselves in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, as we ponder the blessings and challenges of this past year, grant us the serenity of your spirit and openness of heart to see the wonders all around us. Allow us to appreciate all that you have done for us and will continue to do in faithfulness for us, your children. We make this prayer to you through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Great, so welcome everyone, and I just wanted to do some introductions, and then we'll pretty much turn it over to Matt, and Jen and I are here co-facilitating, and we really want to bring that OCSB lens to the work that you're doing in mathematics. And although this is a kindergarten session, the content itself will be very applicable for K to 3. So that's great that we have so many K to 3 teachers that are also jumping in today. So I'm Kim LaSalle, and I work with the Elementary Student Success Department as a coordinator, and my portfolio is mainly mathematics, and I do lots of other things like experiential learning, but mainly mathematics. And I have the privilege to work with Dr. Jennifer Flynn, and Jennifer is our consultant for mathematics, and she is an incredible support, I know, to all of you, and it's an absolute pleasure to learn with her every day. So welcome, Jen. I know you're out there. There's a lot of people on this call, and I also want to say that before we start, that our deep learning framework has a super big focus, of course, on partnerships. And our work with Zorbit's math adventure over the last, I say close to 5 years now, because we have been going on 3 years in with full implementation. And then before that, we piloted the resource in many classrooms across the board. So what an incredible partnership we have. And I just want to say that this Zorbit's math adventure, the folks there are extremely responsive, and they are really grounded in supporting good pedagogy and essentially supporting students and educators in mathematics. So Matt Murphy is with us today, and Matt is an educational designer with Zorbit's Math, and he's going to walk us through some of the key areas and some of the new features as well of Zorbit's. So great to be here and to learn with all of you. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Flynn right now, and she's going to lead us through some of the pieces before Matt jumps in.
All right, hello everybody. Great to be here. Thanks, Kim. It's such a pleasure to get to work with Kim as well. We have such a great team, which is really nice because we get to always learn from each other. We wanted to start off with this graphic that we've put together. This is the OCSB vision of the deep learning math classroom. So of course we've talked a lot over the last few years about deep learning and what that looks like. This graphic just pulls together some of those aspects of deep learning with a specific focus on math, and Zorbit dovetails so well into all of the aspects of deep learning. So we just kind of wanted to make that intentional connection before we turn the floor over to Matt to start talking about all the great things that are Zorbits. So if you take a look at the graphic on your screen, we have at the top some key pedagogical practices, and you'll see things like guided groups. And Matt will certainly be speaking today to how Zorbits can facilitate guided groups or making groupings, or even free you up to do some guided groups if you have some students that are working with Zorbits. We have things like the development of models of thinking and the use of continua to understand how students develop their mathematical reasoning over time. And I know Matt's definitely going to touch on that as well. I want to draw your attention to the middle of the diagram, the orange part. We put the student right in the middle because, of course, it's really all about the student and student learning. And we're really seeing that student as competent, curious, and a lifelong learner. Now you'll notice some intersecting circles right below that, and this is the development of mathematical reasoning from kindergarten to grade 12. So this is like a developmental trajectory. And the work that we're going to be talking about a lot today, the students are going to be in more of that counting phase, which is where they start off. And then as they progress through counting, they'll start to move into some additive reasoning. And then after they become really fluent with additive reasoning, they'll move into the multiplicative stage. And then beyond that, we have things like proportional reasoning and functional reasoning. And those are more kind of into the high school, but just to show you what that progression looks like over time. And I know Matt's certainly going to speak to some of those ideas of counting. And in kindergarten, we talk a lot about the counting principles. Those would all fall into that little circle that says counting. So that's those early mathematical concepts that students are developing, and Zorbits is a great tool to support that learning as students move through. Key resources, again, Zorbits is listed there because it really is a key resource to help us support our students in their mathematical thinking, and hopefully you'll get some ideas today as to how you can work with that in your class or with students, whatever grade you might be with. And then of course that whole idea of the mathematical learning environment and what that looks like. And so we're hoping that we'll share some thoughts about how you might implement using Zorbits, some ways that Zorbits might help you in your practice. And you know, if there's questions and things like that, feel free to put them in the chat and we can always come back to them, or maybe even have some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt now because he has the exciting job of walking us through everything that's wonderful with Zorbits. And I totally echo what Kim said. We're so lucky to work in such great partnership with Zorbits. So turn it over to you, Matt.
Oh, well, thank you, Kim and Jen. The pleasure is, as always, is all ours. Thank you for setting the stage for some of these conceptual underpinnings of what we do in the math class. One of the things I love one of the reasons why I love working with OCSB is because our pedagogical worldview lines up so well. And I thank you for highlighting this central piece here, because this is really the trajectory that we all go through in our mathematical careers, both in academic spheres as well as in our daily lives. And because this is such a huge scope here, these I really like to think of these as like milestones. You know, they're kind of nested in one another. So I'm going to use a lot of analogies. It's best not to dig too deep in on my analogies, but I'll be sure to elaborate on what I mean as I'm going through them. But when I call these milestones, you know, we start in the counting, and it's our job as educators to get students to the next milestone, to get them developing their additive reasoning, and then thinking about multiplicative reasoning and so on and so forth. And all of that sounds great, but some of the challenges lie in, this going from counting to additive can be a 2 or 3 year transition. Is something that's always developing. Going to multiplicative reasoning, we're looking to grade 3, grade 4, and beyond. I mean, it's such a wide scope. How do we bring this to life on a day-to-day basis? And when I think about that, this is kind of where Zorbit lives, and this is kind of why we get so excited about math education, is because I think it really speaks to the idea that teaching, education in general, is a craft, in that there is some artistry involved, but it's part science as well. When you think about some of the other crafts, like there is a wrong way to make soup. There is a wrong way to build a house, but within the frameworks of building a house or making a soup or a nice broth, the creative elements or the creative opportunities in there are endless to really make it your own and to make it impactful, as well as to suit the needs of who your diners are, who's going to be living in the house, or in this instance, who's in our classroom, and who we're trying to move from one milestone to the next. So this is really where Zorbit tries to support teachers, is not by giving you necessarily a paint by numbers and say, like, here, follow these instructions and you'll be an amazing artist, but rather giving you the instructions or the supports to be able to draw. Like my daughter just brought home a brand new book. She's an artist herself. She's 7 years old, and it's how to draw your favorite Pokemon. And no, you don't trace them, but it does show you, like, step by step, draw with these shapes and then build it from there. And what's great about it is it does give her that science, that structural underpinning, but does not remove the creative aspect. You can still make those characters her own, and even devise her own new characters from that architecture. So that's what Zorbit's Math Adventure tries to do. We try to help teachers find their creative voice within this structure. So it is all founded in sound pedagogy. It's founded in the work of Pam Harris and Joe Bowler and Dan Myers, and all of these people. Like Alex Lawson is the other one I wanted to plug, because I'm going to be coming back to her. So we're paying attention to that sort of stuff, but we also want to try and make all of that very heady theory tangible, so that you can bring it to life in the classroom. And when we're going from milestone to milestone, there's a couple of things we need to keep in mind, and this is going to be what we're talking about going through this, is we need to, first of all, know where we're going. We need to have our learning goal. And those milestones make really great, checkpoints along the way, or at least, high-level goals. We need to understand where we're starting from, where our learners are in that trajectory. And then the third thing is, well, how are we going to get there? What are we going to do to get from a student from point A to point B? Although we may walk into a classroom on day one and everyone is grossly oversimplifying here, but everyone is kind of on the same page. But as we start to teach and start to get to know our students, we quickly see that those paths that they take to get to that learning goal are quickly divergent. And that's where the beauty of blended learning can really support learners and support teachers, in that instead of trying to personalize the experience and try to map out every single individual's turns and pathways to success, technology has the ability to adapt to student needs and to be able to make those ideas, like differentiated instruction, differentiated assessment, personalization, all of these wonderful things that Jen just talked about and alluded to, they make them more accessible by making them more scalable. And so one of the ways that we can do that is supporting not just what happens in the classroom, but what happens as you're reflecting on your day, understanding where students are, and then making your plans for the next lesson. So some of the other, I promise I'm going to come down up out of the pedagogical clouds for in just a moment. But I did want to highlight just two other things that I'm going to be talking about as we go through some tangible examples. Those frameworks, like I said, those nested circles, that's a lifelong trajectory. And within each of those bubbles, we're trying to ask ourselves, how do we get from point A to point B? And rather than, like I said, giving you a paint by numbers, there are still some functional ideas that we can use to get from counting to additive reasoning, from additive reasoning to multiplicative reasoning. And NCTM has summed it up pretty well in these 5 strands of mathematical proficiency. And the way that I typically look at these, and I try to promote this in all of my PD sessions, is that this is really a way to understand or to wrap our heads around not necessarily what we're going to teach, but how we're going to teach it. Because getting back to my analogy of building a house, you know, we can make the best roof in the world, or we can install the most amazing cupboards that we've ever designed, but shouldn't we put that roof on first, right? Shouldn't we build a foundation and then put the walls up before we even think about the electrical aspects? So there is a bit of a sequence that we can kind of use to guide our path as we go along that trajectory. And so going from conceptual understanding to procedural fluency seems to make sense, because according to NCTM, procedural fluency, the ability to kind of pull on automaticity, to be able to get to a solution, I don't want to say quickly or rapidly, because I never want to put emphasis on speed, but being able to pull from a bag of tricks that are well developed is something that often gets too much emphasis in the classroom, at least before, or excuse me, at least we should put that after we've built that conceptual understanding, because that procedural fluency comes out of conceptual understanding. Another thing I see a lot of teachers, well, less and less these days, which is fantastic to see, but I remember when I was in school, I would almost never be given these conceptual models to play with first. It was always a rush to abstraction. So an example that I think is very telling is when we're talking about multiplication. There is a tendency, at least like I said, the way that I was taught, to rush to that abstraction of numerals, to rush to the times tables. Today we're learning about multiplication. Here's your times tables, go memorize them because we're gonna need them. You know, that's fine, but you know, there's a much more natural transition from what we've done in grade 1 and grade 2 and even kindergarten to build that conceptual understanding that will bring us that multiplicative reasoning, as opposed to just kind of diving right in and say, if you memorize these, how quickly can you rattle them off? So people call this the concreteness fading model, or the CPA trajectory, basically the idea that we start with something very tangible, very concrete, and eventually once we've manipulated that and we've started to develop these ideas, we can fade that concreteness and start using things like base 10 blocks or counters, things that are a little bit more representative of real life objects. And then and only then we transition to this idea of numerals. So this is kind of our, you know, it's not necessarily from point A to point B, but it's point A to point A1, and then point A1 to point A2. So this is going to help us get from counting to additive reasoning in a much more streamlined fashion, a way that makes sense for students. And of course, it's all founded in that science aspect of education, the cognitive research that's been done by people like Lawson or people like Dan Myers. So I'm coming down out of the clouds here now. All of this sounds great, right? It sounds fantastic, but let's talk about how it actually comes to life in the classroom. So I'm going to show you.
I'm sorry to interrupt. A few people are trying to get in the session. I just got a message, and they're being asked for a password. Do you know if there's something that can be changed on there?
I don't think so. I turned off the waiting room. They shouldn't have to get in with a password. And let me try turning that on and off again. I don't see anyone in the waiting room. I'm not entirely sure, Kim.
Okay, I'll let them know. We're just, yeah, a few people said that they were now being asked for a password, so I don't know why. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
That's quite all right. We want to make sure this gets to as many ears as possible, and happy to know that I'm recording this session so they can watch it afterwards if they unfortunately can't make it in. All right, so coming down, that was a great point to interrupt, Kim, because we're transitioning out of the clouds back down to earth and looking at some of the activities that will help build that foundation when we're talking about the idea of counting, that first milestone. How do we get students counting? You'll notice when you play Zorbit's Math Adventure that you won't dive into numerals, right? Adhering to this idea of CPA, we're first going to give students the opportunity to explore this idea of quantity. Right, that there is a sequence in terms of increasing quantity, and we're going to show them activities that they're going to use visual models like 10 frames, like tally marks, or even like, you know, numbers on your hands, dice patterns, or any larger dot patterns like you find on playing cards and things like that. These are the models that are going to help students better understand this idea of cardinality, that a number represents a quantity. And so eventually, once we've had the chance to explore that a little bit, we will fade that concreteness and start working with the same idea in the context of numerals. I'm skipping a few steps along the way here too, for the sake of brevity. You know, along the way, we're going to see these spatial reasoning cues, these tubes, which, you know, arguably, we probably don't even need to see these numerals to solve this problem because of the way the tubes are shaped. But eventually we're going to remove that scaffolding as well, and they'll just be like a little bundle of tubes. They'll all look the same. So we need to focus on that numeracy piece in order to solve the problem. Then as they go on, once we've kind of developed this understanding that these funny looking symbols that kind of look like letters but not quite actually represent quantities, and again, there's a few blanks here that I'm not going to go into, that I'm glazing over a little bit for brevity. Eventually, we're going to get them using this idea of counting to encourage the strategy of counting on. So if you think about Lawson's continuum of numeracy development, I'm going to grossly oversimplify her work now too. It's a series of strategies that are categorized or sequenced according to their, again, gross oversimplification, their complexity. So if we're counting on our fingers, counting one at a time, that's very foundational. It's called cardinality. But eventually we'll be able to say, all right, let's use anchors of 5. So let's start with 5. It's a familiar number. Here's why it's a familiar number, because I have 5 fingers. And then I can just count on from that number. So basically jumping into the middle of a number line, being able to count on. It's a slightly more sophisticated strategy than just counting from 1 all the time. Then eventually, and this is a grade 1 activity we're looking at here now, we're going to put that same idea of counting on, we're going to put that strategy to work, because now we're going to be adding, and we're going to be looking at it through the lens of a brand new visual model, this idea of a number line. So these are how we take that idea of going from counting to additive reasoning, and how we can make incremental steps along the way using some of the activities that we have in the Zorbit Math Adventure game. Now, some of these ideas, you know, do you need a digital resource to do all of those things? Absolutely not. But like I mentioned a moment ago, one of the great things about using a digital resource is that it will personalize the experience based on student proficiency. So rather than you trying to manage a class of 30 students and trying to identify where everyone is at every single moment, we're not trying to replace that, but we want to be a second set of eyes. And so when we set the game up for students and we focus them in on certain activities that we want them focusing on, the game will scaffold and help keep them in this zone of proximal development, this flow state where the game is always, it's never too easy that it becomes boring. It's never too difficult that it becomes frustrating. It's always with that, they're always encountering that productive struggle. Gosh, we educators, we really love our buzzwords, don't we? That productive struggle. To jump ahead a little bit further, when we talk about this additive reasoning, now this is a grade 3 activity. So by the time we got to grade 1, we've developed some counting strategies. We've hit that additive reasoning milestone, or at least most of the students would have. At least that's our goal. And now when we get to grade 3, it's time to start thinking about multiplicative reasoning. That's when we start to see multiplication showing up in real ways in the curriculum. So instead of diving right into the abstraction of times tables, we're going to leverage what we've done in previous years. We're going to walk in the front door with our additive reasoning hats on. We're going to show them this visual model that multiplication or constructing a number can be done through repeated addition, at least most numbers. We're not going to get down the rabbit hole of prime numbers here, but for the numbers that we're going to be focusing on, we can construct them by adding equal groups a certain number of times. So we're building on strategies that they've used, like skip counting or doublings or near doublings, all of these strategies that are midway in that continuum. And then we're going to, once we've kind of set the stage for what we're doing here, we're constructing numbers in a new way by breaking them down into smaller groups, smaller but equal groups. Now let's give them a visual model and start developing this conceptual understanding. Let's kind of twist their perspective a little bit and start showing them these rectangles, and that we can construct numbers by carving out rectangles, or what we call arrays, or sometimes area models. And then once, this is the scaffolding that I was talking about a moment ago, we're going to start pretty straightforward. There's only one way to answer this problem, but eventually we're going to put this in an environment where they need to use that visual model. And notice that we're never asking necessarily like which one is an array of 15, which one is an array of 18. Students are being asked to actively construct these arrays. So they're building their confidence and their competence in using these models. And eventually we'll put them in a scenario where they need to use these models, but also employ a higher level of reasoning. And a great thing about these opportunities is that it really offers students the ability to develop their own strategies and to progress in their own way. It offers them agency over how they solve the problem. In examples like this, there are dozens of ways that students could possibly answer this. And it saves us from having to go to that, to jump straight to that algorithmic approach that when you're multiplying numbers, we stack them up and then we multiply the ones and then we multiply the tens and the ones. And, if you mess up on step 3, then step 4 is going to be all messed up. All of that stuff is great, but it comes later. It comes after conceptual understanding. At least that's our perspective. And eventually we will get to this idea of procedural fluency where we will introduce the abstraction of numerals. And of course, we do want them to know their times tables. I would never say that knowing your times tables is a bad thing, but only after we've developed those conceptual understandings and we understand why 3 times 5 gives us 15. And it's not just something that we blindly accept. So we've gone from a very concrete conceptual model to something that's a little bit more procedural fluency focused in an abstraction of numerals. So that's a very fancy way of saying, we're going to start playing with an idea and then we're going to enumerate it later, and that's how we're going to learn how to do multiplication. So that's how Zorbit's Math Adventure approaches these trajectories. But it begs the question, how do we know where to go with our students? Because as I mentioned, our students diverge quite a bit, and we're not going to propose that we're going to replace a teacher's intuition in terms of what a student needs next, merely a second set of eyes. So this is where I'm going to toss it back over to Kim and Jen, because there are some ideas on how ECEs in particular and kindergarten classroom teachers, certainly not limited to those pairs, might be able to collaborate around answering this question.
Great, I'll jump in here. So earlier this year, and I'll speak to the kindergarten context right now, ECEs are now able to access the Zorbit's data. So as more of a view only, so accessing the data, accessing all of the the performance data of students, then there are some limitations, and that's basically because of the way our Clever and Power School are set up. So. But what it did is it allowed for even more collaboration between kindergarten educators, which is fantastic. So now you can look at the data together. You can pull out some of the activities, and Matt's going to go through some of the performance data pieces as well. So that's been has proven to be a really valuable asset to have increased collaboration and time to dialogue over the data that is coming out of the dashboard. So I'll turn it over to Matt, and he's going to lead us through some of the performance data and the support materials that are available to respond.
Right. So like Kim said, this is a really great opportunity for teachers and ECEs to collaborate over kind of where students are, and more importantly, what are we going to do about that? So when you log into your teacher dashboard, you're going to have access to all of the performance data that the game is collecting when students are playing the game. So this is our second set of eyes here. And we can quickly identify trends. Like Charlie here, I hope you can read the text, but if you can't, I'm looking at Charlie here, this bottom row. And I can see that Charlie has a few areas where he needs some further development. Now, as the teacher, I know this. I've been working with Charlie all year. This is probably not news to me. What's interesting about this is it does give me some points of priority, right? I can see that, patterns and shapes, for example, are of particular interest. And if I look over here at counting groups, I can see that I have a class-wide trend where this is one of the most challenging scenarios a teacher faces. It would be great if everyone was struggling, to be kind of a little bit provocative there, because we would know what to do. It would be a very easy decision. We just need to focus in on this concept, and we're going to do it together, and we're all going to build our proficiency with this idea. But Sean here is making things complicated because, as per usual, he's just killing it. And so Sean deserves just as much attention as Charlie and Lavin do. Just because he's doing well doesn't mean I can forget about him. So that's why I say this is one of the most challenging scenarios a teacher can face, where we have what we call a learning gap. There's a gap or a wide range of abilities within this concept. So this is where these conversations can start is looking at these and see what is our priority, what's happening class-wide, and what's happening with individuals. But let's dig a bit deeper. These high-level trends are useful to a point, but let's dig in deeper. We were talking about all of these strategies and these continua that we use to better understand what students are doing to solve a problem, what strategies they're employing. And so if we click on any of these rectangles, we can get what we call a concept report. And it's a breakdown of any sort of subcategories or strategies that are associated with this concept. So in this instance, and I'm realizing now that some of my visuals here don't quite line up. This was supposed to say addition back here on counting groups, because this is the addition report. But when we're looking at addition to 10, I can see Charlie's, he's doing great. Addition to 10, he can perform quite well on, but when he gets into larger numbers, things start to break down. My initial inclination, the way that I always used to present this, was that we need to focus on addition to 10. But I only recently realized that that may not be the best approach. Drilling in on where he's struggling is not necessarily what we want to do. Instead, let's focus on what he's doing, what's going well with addition to 10. Maybe he's counting on his fingers. Maybe he's employing cardinality. Maybe he has those math facts memorized, and whatever the case, whatever strategy he's using, it doesn't scale when he gets to larger numbers. So let's focus in on where he's succeeding, but let's twist it a bit. Let's give him more opportunities to subitize. Let's encourage more interactions with 10 frames so we can use ideas like anchors of 10 and things like that. So all along the way, we're trying to answer from the teacher dashboard perspective. We're trying to show teachers, or at least get them talking about these questions. Where is my student? And more importantly, what can I do about that? What are my next steps? And so this button right here is going to hopefully be the next part of that conversation, is that, okay, we need to sit down with Charlie, we need to work on addition to 10. Here's how we need to approach it. Well, what does that look like tangibly? Well, our teaching activities library will spit out a bunch of recommendations as to the types of activities that are going to support Charlie, that are going to leverage what he's doing well and help him get better at the things that he's struggling with. And
Matt,
so,
I'm
yes.
wondering, sorry, if I could interject just for 1 second, because I'm just
Please do.
noticing there's a couple of questions in the chat. Some folks are just wondering where they see this actual, where do they see the dashboard? They're just wanting to know exactly where they find this, because clearly this is, a really important part of Zorbits, and we want people to know how to get to it.
Of course. So if you're logged into your teacher dashboard, this is your class progress area. And I believe because of the way that is set up in OCSB, this is available through your teacher portal, is it not? That's the login.
Yeah. Yeah, right through the teacher portal. In your teacher portal, you'll have your Zorbits icon the same way that your students have the Zorbits app on their student portal. And you'll have a dashboard link right in there.
Perfect. You're in there, it's the class progress area. That's where you're going to find all of this data. And then I got the concept report simply by clicking on one of these rectangles. So I want to focus on Charlie. I want to focus on addition is actually the one that I am clicking on here. And this is going to pop up this concept report where I can see more specifically where he's falling down. And then I guess to answer the question within the next context, the teaching activities library is also available in that left side nav. It's not pictured here, but there's a little icon up in the top corner of your screen. It's not pictured here in my screenshot, but that should slide open a whole bunch of tools for you to access. So you can access your class progress there, your teaching activities library there. But the way that I typically recommend teachers access their teaching activities library, especially if we've already been into the game, we're kind of mid-year, we kind of have this data-driven progression as to what we're going to do day to day. This is going to help you get to those recommendations a little bit more quickly if you access it through the class progress area. So one of the things that you'll notice about these activities is that they are not worksheets. They're designed to employ 21st century skills. They're designed to employ that same level of playfulness that students love when they play the Zorbits video game. These are activities that are designed around resources that are typically available in most kindergarten to grade 3 classrooms and even easily replicable at home and are designed to be low floor, high ceiling activities in that, regardless of where we are in that trajectory, by and large, there's something in there interesting for all students regardless if they're ready to start thinking about multiplicative reasoning or they're just coming out of their counting phase. There's something interesting there for everyone. And so, like I said, they're meant to be very playful, very employee design thinking, encourage students to be creative. And one of my favorites here is addition on a number line, which I put a bit of an Easter spin around it when I took this picture. And basically it focuses on procedural fluency. We're practicing addition, but we're doing so in a very kinesthetic fashion. Students are up and they're actively moving and they're engaged in their learning rather than just filling out a series of sums, which is the way that I would have experienced that learning when I was going through school. So they're meant to be very, very playful. But this kind of brings us to the next question before I start digging too deep under the hood of these activities. One of the things that I hear Kim and Jen talking about is this idea of provocation. And so how do these tools help support provocation in the classroom? Jen or Kim, would you care to elaborate on what we mean by that?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the nice things about Zorbits being that it's a K-3 tool, it really lends itself well to kindergarten as well as grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, but you may use it differently depending on the grade that you're teaching. So if you are a kindergarten, in a kindergarten classroom, we pulled this out of the OCSB kindergarten support document from page 52. This is that whole idea that some mathematics is learned through play and just as students are engaging in different experiences, and some of the mathematics is learned through adult guided experiences. So just thinking about that, you know, that some of the math that the kids are going to be doing is going to be something that they discover because of a provocation that you've put out that's really, you know, grabbed their attention and they're going to engage with it. And then some of it's going to be a little more directed by the educator. So in terms of provocations, we were thinking about a lot of those wonderful games and activities that are built right into Zorbits. Those could be put out on a table as a provocation. So there's a great little game, you know, it's got some, maybe some dice or some other interesting things that are going to get the students to kind of want to come over and see what it's all about. And that's where the opportunity for the classroom teacher or the ECE to be sitting there and to be doing that more guided kind of exploration in math. So we're thinking about them as lots of different ways you can use the things within Zorbits as provocations, and sometimes it's going to be more guided and sometimes it'll be less guided, but both are certainly very, very important for the development of mathematical reasoning. And then if you happen to be a teacher in grade 1 to grade 3, it might look a little different. It might look more like perhaps a center that you've set up. Perhaps it's a guided group that you've set up and the students are going to come to you and you're going to play a game to address a specific gap in their skills. So we just kind of wanted to put out there that, you know, this is really very appropriate for kindergarten right through grade 3. And there are lots of different ways that all of those wonderful activities can be used that are within Zorbits.
I'm gonna set it better myself. That's fantastic. And you know, as you were explaining that, one of the things that popped into my head is something we mentioned earlier is that, you know, our learning goal often involves not necessarily just what do we want to teach, but how do we want to teach that? And knowing where students are in their trajectory is going to inform that. Knowing where we are in developing these conceptual understanding or that procedural fluency or any of those other strands is really going to inform how we present these tools. One of the adages that I love talking about is this idea of it's not the resource, it's what you do with it that really makes it shine. You can have the fanciest car in the world, but if you don't know how to drive, you know, it can fall short in terms of what it's intended to do. And so some of the implementation strategies that we see teachers using to deploy some of the Zorbits resources are things like these one-on-one where we sit down and we observe the student as they're completing an activity, whether it is the digital one like we're seeing on screen here or one of the hands-on activities, or if we're going to encourage students to develop that procedural fluency and give them that opportunity to think independently and solve problems, become independent problem solvers. You know, we might set it up like Jen said as a station where students go and they operate independently. Even these activities in the teaching activities library are going to help support that understanding of where students are, and not just necessarily by their nature. You know, we try and provide supports at every step along the way, so that when students are playing these activities, when they are rolling these dice and playing with these counters over one of the centers in a center-based lesson, if we pop over just for a second and ask one of these questions, what we're doing is we're asking students to tell us what's going on in their brains, to elicit what strategies they're using. And that's going to help us understand where that student is in their trajectory. More importantly, what we can do about that. So we're going to ask those key questions, and depending on the answers, well, maybe we need to support that learner and give them more, like I mentioned earlier, more subitizing opportunities, more engaging with 10 frames or anchors of 5 and things like that. Or like the Seans of the world we saw a moment ago, who's just nailing it and is going to get bored if we leave them alone too long. Let's twist it a little bit and get them thinking about the next strategy or the next concept. Get a sight set on that next milestone. And so that's what the extensions and variations are all about. So these are baked into all of the activities that we have in our teaching activities library. But another way that we see these things being used is not just, those are two ends of the spectrum. We sit down one-on-one with the student, or we send every student to a device and let them play independently. But there's some middle ground there as well that really make for rich opportunities for provocation. Like Jen mentioned, the center-based lesson. We have, five Chromebooks set up in one station, 3 or 4 different activities from the library set up at other stations. And of course, if we found them in our teaching activities library through the use of our class progress area, if we're using the recommendations that the dashboard is giving us, we can rest assured that all of those activities are all tied to a common theme so that we can still personalize and differentiate. But at the end of the day, we want to be able to sit back as a group and come together and consolidate that learning. So all of us were engaging with addition to 20, for example, but all of us were doing it in a slightly different way, using a different visual model. And then either as an intro or as an outro or way to consolidate, I absolutely love Math Talk. So buckle up, I'm about to nerd out real hard, or at least I'm going to try to resist the temptation, because these are one of my favorite resources in the classroom, and I think it's real in the teaching activities library. And one of the reasons why is because of its opportunity to promote provocation as well as its diagnostic assessment opportunity. So we show basically, for anyone who's unfamiliar with what a Math Talk is or how we run one, all of these are accompanied with instructions, key questions, best practices, different models to use in the classroom to get everyone involved, to hear those student voices that we don't necessarily hear from all the time. And basically we want to lead a full group conversation around a very simple visual with a very simple question. How many dots do we see? And the answer is 9, but you know what, 9, who cares? 9, the answer being 9 is not the point. What the point is how did you see 9? What strategy are you using? Are you counting one at a time like Ali here? If we're counting one at a time, we're employing cardinality. That tells us that this student, we got some work to do. We need to provide more subitizing opportunities to help them move along that trajectory or that progression. Mary is ready. She's already making that first step into multiplicative reasoning because look, she found 3 equal groups and she's doing repeated addition. LeBron is going to be a titan of industry because he's already thinking about supply chain optimization as he's taking inventory of the different colors there. And Christine I'm Christine because I saw that pyramid there, that familiar shape. So I subitized that familiar shape and then saw 3 more down underneath, and 6 and 3, of course, are 9. So having these conversations not only tell the teacher a lot about what's going on in students' heads on an individual basis, students get to learn from each other. Ali can see what Christine is doing, be like, I never thought about it like that. And it's a great way to get students really excited. Students will inevitably, once this becomes a routine in the classroom, they inevitably start clamoring over each other to come up with new ideas and new strategies, and they really challenge each other. And it's really, really amazing to see. If you're not necessarily familiar with Math Talks and you're thinking to yourself like, gosh, I would really like to try one, but I don't know where to start, this is a great one, particularly at the kindergarten level, because it doesn't involve any sort of numeracy per se. It's more of these looking at objects and using our spatial reasoning and attributes of different objects and identifying which one doesn't belong. The great thing about this is there is no correct answer. There's no one right answer. Students, just about everybody can walk into this scenario and have an opinion as to which one doesn't belong. And we did some fun videos. Perhaps you recognize the set here. My home office has become a bit of a soundstage for these mathematics videos. And we had our good friend Kyle Pierce come on and help us do one of these. And he gave a great little discussion about what attributes are and how we can use that idea to make decisions. But even in the classroom, you don't necessarily need these visuals. Grab 4 objects for anything and just ask students which one is different, which one doesn't belong, and get them answering not just that question. The more important question is why. Can you defend that answer that you just gave? And so now that we've kind of gone through a lot of the meat and potatoes of the theory that kind of underpins all of the Zorbit's tools and how we fit into the lifelong trajectory of going from counting to additive to multiplicative and beyond. We've looked at how those tools kind of bring those ideas to life in the classroom in hopefully a tangible way. Kim, there's some unique ways in that, or not necessarily unique, I think we already alluded to them a moment ago, but how do we access, how do students get into these tools?
Sorry, I was still muted. Okay, so the students, the great thing about having Clever and everything connected to PowerSchool is that your students have single sign-on in the student portal. So that's where they can access there, or they can access at home as well if they get to their student portal. So that's a really important piece, that students are aware of how to get to their student portal when they are at home. So I know that might have been when students are used to using their QR code access, maybe in the classroom in kindergarten and grade 1, they didn't have that at home. So that's something that is really important, that students are aware, and parents are aware of how students get to those to their Zorbit's account. And then teachers as well have access through the staff portal. That's where you'll find your dashboard and all of the teaching activities in there. And I know that we had some questions in the chat about the teaching activities and how to get to the teaching activities as well.
Yeah, and I see coming to the rescue there. It's the teaching activities tab in the dashboard menu. So
great.
All of the tools that we're showing are in the dashboard in that side navigation menu.
Perfect. Okay.
So like Kim said, students can access the game by logging in the same way that they would access most of the digital resources in OCSB through their student portal. But one of the things that we've recently changed, it's only a minor change in terms of the way we present it, but when they get in there, the Zorbit's universe is a vast expense. So when we talk about blended learning and using digital resources, getting back to that car analogy, if we're not using it with intention, if we don't know how to use it properly and how to guide that experience, it can fall short and students can get distracted. They can end up in anywhere in the Zorbit's universe. And watching my daughter play, if I don't have the game control set, if I don't have her guided to the direction that I want her to go in, she's not finishing levels. She's half completes an activity like, oh, I wonder what the pirates are doing over on this planet. Oh, there's bees over here. So, students can get easily distracted. So one of the ways that we encourage teachers to use these tools with intentionality is to guide that in-game experience. And the way that we do that, first of all, is using our game controls. So you can define, and again, this is also in your teacher dashboard. So you'll see off on that left side nav panel, you'll see game controls. And this is where you can turn on and off different areas of the game for the entire class, or on a student by student basis. So Charlie could be exploring one planet while Sean is doing another planet. And of course, as time goes on, I want to go in and refine that so that students are always focused on the concepts that I want them focusing on. When it's business as usual in the classroom, one of the ways I typically promote teachers to use this is when you're in the classroom, lock it down. Guide that experience so that you know that their class time is being used the way that you want them to, or at least it's focused in the direction that you want them focusing on. But at the end of the day, and they want to go home and play, open it up, let them explore at their leisure, and let them work on their, the numeracy skills that they want to explore. So that does mean going in here on a regular basis and modifying these game controls. That's not necessarily a bad thing because it is a big part of the lesson plan. If we want to integrate this even further into our lesson plans, we can create assignments that focus not just on the ideas that we want them focusing on, but we can handpick strategies, we can handpick math concepts and deliver a custom module, a custom game package within the game that focuses on those concepts that we've handpicked. Now, when we've used these tools, and again, the assignments tool is in the teacher dashboard as well, it's all in there. When we use these things, this is what it looks like. So you'll notice a few changes. One of the constellations is gone. I've completely removed that grade from existence. Some of the planets that were otherwise available are now, I tell kids it's nighttime on those planets and it's not safe for Zorbit to land a ship in the dark. Aside from the astrological inaccuracies of that story, kids love it. And then when they have an assignment, one of the ways they can access that from their dashboard, and so this little animation is going to show you exactly what that looks like. It'll launch them to the planet that it's on, and there's Sergeant Scrambler waiting with a custom mission made just for them. And so when I say create a routine with assignments, particularly in this era of remote teaching and home learning, one of the things I've seen a lot of teachers doing is creating that routine and sending a note home to parents saying like, hey, every week there's going to be a brand new assignment in there. Do it if you want, you know, no pressure. They can pick away at it throughout the week. It's, you know, going to take them about 45 minutes and all said and done. But it's something that keeps me as the teacher in the driver's seat and keeps my curriculum plan on the rails. I can stay connected with my students, and it gives them an excuse to keep coming back every now and then to check out what's new and to continue their learning. So whether you use that strategy in the classroom when it does come back to business as usual or whatever this new normal ends up being, or if you want to do this over the summer as part of your remote learning strategy, this is a great way to kind of stay connected. And of course, as they're playing the game, you're still getting that performance data so you can better make more informed decisions as to what to do next, regardless of how much distance separates you and your students. And then just to sweep up a little bit here, Kim, there was a few little points. I think you already touched on a lot of these in terms of the single sign-on and how they can access it at home. The student portal login, you mentioned this to have that information. But here's a nice little Christmas present that I'm going to let you tell them all about.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think we went over the first couple of things. Again, if a student is accessing at home through an iPad, they will need to use the iPad Zorbit app. And so that's where they will need to have their password information that can be found in your teacher account. So again, we talked about the student portal login, have it ready to go home. And that's an important piece too, so students they won't have their QR access at home, of course. And an exciting thing is that every school will be getting additional Chromebooks for their school, and we actually worked out a nice little deal that each kindergarten classroom received 2 new Chromebooks, because we know there are sometimes there's a bit of a shortage in kindergarten, and you've got a lot of students in those classes. So 2 new Chromebooks have been sent out, and they are all ready to be QR activated with the labels for kindergarten coming to your classroom. And I think that's it on this page. And somebody had asked about iOS and tablets, so we answered that, I think, in that one.
Right. Yes. Someone asked about it works on iPads but not iPhones. Yes, that is the case, and the reason being some of the models require some fine adjustments, like if you're dealing with space 10 blocks or regrouping, place value addition models. The experience on such a small screen can be more frustrating than it's worth sometimes. So that's why it's not available on your iPhone. If you look it up in the App Store on your phone, you're not even going to see it, but it does work on iPads.
Great.
One of the things Kim alluded to is this idea of using the QR codes to log in. Sorry, Kim, were you trying to interject there with something before we move on?
Oh, that's great. I'll just.
Perfect. All right, I love this because do you ever see those? There's this chef on social media who he's just making he holds eye contact with the camera while he's making a souffle and these perfectly designed desserts. This is what this kid reminds me of, because she logs into her Chromebook and right into Zorbits without breaking eye contact with the camera pretty much the entire time. So that's why I put the title on here, log in like a boss, because she's the login using the QWERTY keyboard in kindergarten and grade 1 can be a barrier. But the way that it's set up through Clever is that you can use a QR code to log in pretty easily. And there are resources, Kim, you mentioned that there are other resources that teachers can use to really dig into what this process looks like if it's not already set up. But here are the Coles Notes versions. Basically, it happens by setting up your Chromebook, finding your class set of badges at this website here. Is that pretty well sum it up there, Kim?
Yes, that sums it up. And with the new Chromebooks, there will be a whole information page and a link to all of the information as far as setting up the QR access. If you have Chromebooks in your classroom that don't already have QR access, it's a simple process to do. And you can do it through the help desk when you just submit the serial codes of the Chromebooks and they can set that up. And it's available for kindergarten and grade 1 students as well.
Wonderful.
And somebody did ask, there was a question about Android apps. Matt, can you address that?
Unsupported at the moment, unfortunately. Just trying to wring my hat and sheepishly say, I'm sorry, we're not supported on Android right now. It is something that is on our roadmap for future versions, but I don't have a definitive date right now, unfortunately.
Great.
But if you're not using an iPad, iPad's kind of a bubble scenario where it's, most people are playing Zorbits on Chromebooks or on the web browser, and it's the game is available at play.zorbitsmath.com if you're not logging in through your student portal, which of course, that's the best way to go in there because of the single sign-on. But I think that just about does it for most of what we wanted to cover here today. But while I only have a few minutes left, I wanted to show you that we just recently made some exciting updates to our platform. So if you are using an iPad app, now's the time to update it because you're going to see some amazing new updates. First of all, we talked about using Chromebooks. This idea of, do you ever try to drag something on a Chromebook or watch a student try and do it? It itself is a bit of a drag. So we dropped it, pardon the pun. And so that, you can now click things to pick them up and then click again to drop them. Our help button functionality will now highlight things that students can interact with on screen to make those objects of interest a little bit more easy to find. If you create an assignment, you can now inspect that assignment directly in your dashboard. Before, you had to log in as a student, but because of Clever, that was very difficult, if not impossible to do. So now we've heard feedback that, gosh, we would love to be able to see what students see when we create an assignment. So we made that thing. So in your teacher dashboard, you'll see this little tiny play button on this screenshot. This is your teacher sandbox where you can access all of the game, and now any assignments that you create for the entire class will show up here as well so you can inspect them. There's some new onboarding activities for the students that'll show them how to push the buttons, how to drag a slider, how to move things, basically show them around the controls that they'll be using. And a brand new feature that we've added to our dashboard progress area is now you can see right at a glance how long students have been interacting with the given concepts, as well as the total time that they've been playing. This is something that teachers have been asking for, and so our development team said, yeah, it'll take us, about a month to make it, and then the next day they were like, oh, we made that thing, because that's just how they operate. So these are some new updates that you can explore. You can explore them today because they are out in the world. And then finally, Kim, you mentioned that there's a lot of great supports available beyond just these live sessions. You want to just get your plug in for these resources?
Absolutely. So we do have lots of resources available to support you. And first of all, in the middle, you'll see that our math partners are available. So every school has a math partner assigned to them, and that list can be found in the OCSB math site or in the professional learning site. There's a link under numeracy as well. So please reach out at any time. We're always here to support you. There are lots of resources, again, in the professional learning site, which is linked in the staff portal. And there's this webinar actually will be added to the on-demand section, and there are tons of great resources in there. And of course, the OCSB math site has lots of great resources and a link to the kindergarten site as well. So lots of support available. to you. And I think that as I was looking through the questions in the chat, I think most of them were answered. And thank you, Patty. Patty Luxton's been out there answering lots of questions, but certainly if you have more questions after the session or as you're exploring Zorbit's more for distance learning or back in your classroom, please reach out to us. And the one question about the summer, Zorbit's, all of the apps on the portal are accessible through most of the summer. So there is a small window where where Power School is now being converted over to the next year's teacher. So there is a little bit of time in August within a 2-week period that students may not have full access, but other than that, they will continue to have access throughout the summer.
Thank you so much, Patty. You've been our official moderator for the chat, so thank you so much. That's
Great.
very helpful. And hopefully I was able to answer any questions that Patty wasn't able to get to. And I'm just going to echo what Kim said about if you have any questions, if you're anything like me, as soon as you hang up the call, that's when you'll think of those 10 questions you meant to ask. So don't hesitate to reach out to our support line. Our good friends Hassan and Shane are on the other side of this. It's not a robot, they're real boys. And as a former educator, I love being able to support teachers with lesson planning ideas. So if you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm teaching geometry attributes next, what have you got for me, Zorbit? Hit me up directly. I'd love to be able to point you in the right direction. And on social media, we've got all sorts of fun stuff happening all the time. If you missed our Great Galactic Twitter Challenge at the beginning of this year, we had tons of fun, so you can catch up on some of those things and some of those challenges. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We do tons of stuff globally as well. And any new resources we create, we'll put them out through social media to try and get them in as many hands as possible. So be sure to follow us there so you don't miss a thing. But aside from that, thank you very much for your time, everyone. It's been always a pleasure to talk to OCSB teachers. Kim, Jen, did you have anything else you wanted to sweep up with?
Jen, do you have anything?
Thank you to everyone for joining us, and it was a great session and lots of good information, and absolutely reach out to your math learning partner or to Kim or myself if there's any questions as well.
Great, and thank you again, Matt. You're a great partner, and we love the mathematics. We love the calendar activities. We love all the weekly challenges, and we appreciate the way that Zorbit's jumped in right away when distance learning became a thing. You responded. So thank you again for your ongoing support, and thank you to everyone again that took the time out of their day to join us in this learning.
Thank you very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.